Welcome to a special edition of the Upshot podcast. I'm Charlie Eisenhood, joined by Josh Mansfield. And it's the holiday week. Hope everybody's having a great holiday season. If you celebrate Christmas, Hanukkah, and you're having a nice time, getting ready for the new year coming up just around the corner. This is not a news show. We have not checked in on the news. We know nothing about what is happening a week after we recorded this. So this is a special show, a roundtable, which if you've been a long-time Upshot listener, you will know about this in holiday times. So what's it going to be this year? Well, we're going to be talking to some professionals in disc golf, lacrosse, and pickleball about emerging sports and getting some details about what has helped these sports grow, what makes them tick, where do they see their growth in the future, and a lot more. Josh, we've got a great panel, and I'm super excited.
A lot of diverse professionals who occupy important spaces in their sport, and sports that are very diverse for lots of reasons. It really was just a great interview panel. And I think that in previous years, and this is something that I think you mentioned, Charlie, is that we've had guests really interact with each other super well. There wasn't quite as much in this one, but their answers were just so thoughtful and detailed. It's clear that we are talking to some of the best minds in each of these sports who think a lot about these problems and the great opportunities that emerging sports have right now.
I think that anybody who likes disc golf can probably find some interesting things to take away from this episode. But certainly if you're in the industry and you're a professional working in whether that's manufacturing or course design or apparel or anything like that, media, you're going to find this particularly useful and interesting. So hope you enjoy it. And so we will be joined next by Steve Hill, Chuck Menke, and Terry Foy. We'll be right back. The Upshot is presented by Pound Disc Golf, makers of the best bags in the sport. Well, they've got the brand new Deluxe Rufuses available now. Some of them coming with all three upgrades: the Velcro patch, the lower side pocket upgrade, and the new Spacer Mesh shoulder pad upgrade. So check that out. They start at $324.99. I'm carrying a Rufus myself. Fantastic bag. A little bit on the smaller side, so if you're not somebody who wants to carry tons of discs, it's a great lightweight option, available now at pounddiscgolf.com. It's time for an Upshot Holiday Roundtable. We are super excited to be doing an episode about emerging sports. We all know disc golf has been growing a lot lately, and certainly growing for many years at this point. But we have some other sports that have maybe even have the claim to be faster growing than disc golf. We'll get into that today. First, I want to introduce our panelists here. We'll get things started with marketing director at UDisc, Steve Hill, who has been here, of course, former co-host of the Upshot podcast, former editor of Ulti-World Disc Golf for many years. Steve has been at UDisc now for a few years, worked at PDGA for a while, and is a real expert in all things disc golf. Steve, great to have you back as always.
Hey, thanks for having me, guys. I'm looking forward to chatting with both you, Charlie, and Josh, and obviously our fellow emerging sports compatriots here. I'm excited to learn some of the tricks and see what we can do to bring them over to disc golf.
Chuck Menke joins us. He is the Chief Marketing Officer at USA Pickleball. He's worked for 27 years in the sports industry, primarily on the marketing communications side, and has worked in the NCAA level, Olympic movement, and more. So, Chuck, thanks so much for being here.
Charlie, thanks. Excited to be here.
And last but not least, Terry Foy is the CEO of Inside Lacrosse, which is the biggest media entity in lacrosse, the biggest website in lacrosse. And I've actually interviewed Terry before about lacrosse vis-a-vis Ultimate. So great to hear his perspective here today. He went to Loyola, Maryland, and has been working at Inside Lacrosse since he graduated. Terry, thanks for being here.
Absolutely, Charlie. Thank you so much for having me. Looking forward to the conversation.
All right, well, let's jump in. So 3 sports all doing big things right now. Pickleball feels like, if you look in the media, pickleball fastest growing sport in America. You see it all the time. And Chuck, I guess I'll just start with you on that. I was under the impression, actually, the other day I went and I looked at pickleball because I was like, it's probably got invented in like 2001. And I was very wrong. It's like way older than that. But it seems like it's really found a following in the last 5 to 10 years and is now all over the media. You've got celebrity cameos. LeBron bought a team. Who knows? There's a million pro leagues. I can't even keep up. So tell us a little bit about how pickleball has found so much traction lately. And is it, in fact, the fastest growing sport in America?
Well, so it's the fastest growing sport in America, according to the Sports Fitness and Industry Association, and actually for 2 years running. And I'm guessing after this year, it'll be 3 years in a row. So the number that is oftentimes thrown around in a lot of those media articles that you were referring to is 4.8 million participants in the sport. That was as of 2021. And we think that number was actually even higher, and it's certainly higher now, a year later. So the sport is white hot. It's, you're right. It's got a longer history than a lot of people realize. It was founded in 1965 in a place called Bainbridge Island in Washington State. And a lot of folks, their first exposure to the sport was in PE class when they were kids. It's got sort of a stereotype of really being close to the senior set. A lot of older folks in their 60s, 70s, and even 80s have played the sport historically. And that was accurate for a long time and still is. But we're seeing it skewing much, much younger now. So there are a lot of millennials and Gen Z folks as well as kids picking up paddles and enjoying the sport. The sport really took off about 4 years ago. It had been growing prior to the pandemic, but the pandemic was really a hyper accelerator for the sport for a number of reasons. And that's why you're hearing so much about it these days. And, everybody that or everyone has someone that they know that's playing pickleball these days and enjoying it. So it's multi-generational. Grandparents can play with grandkids, which is kind of unique. There aren't too many sports out there, and it's just inherently fun. Like that's the kind of the secret sauce for the sport. And I think why so many people have gravitated towards it. It's very social, and it was an opportunity for people to get outside during the pandemic at a safe distance and interact and kind of engage in a healthy, fit, active lifestyle as we started to come back to reality coming out of the pandemic.
Obviously, a lot of overtones for disc golf. Steve, we know how much disc golf has grown. Estimates were doubled during the pandemic. That's probably like starting to lean towards maybe closer to tripled. I mean, somewhere in that range. What has disc golf's catalyst been besides the pandemic and many of the things you just heard from Chuck?
Sure. Yeah. The thing that we see the most, and I'm sure you guys know this being in the sport, but it's word of mouth. You know what I mean? I mean, we've conducted surveys among disc golfers, and it's like 90% of people introduce someone to the sport every year. Whether that's one person or, upwards of 10, we've got, several people who introduce multiple people to the sport every year. It's just one of those things that, people get into the sport, they get hooked on it, they talk about it nonstop, they tell their friends, they bring their friends out to the course, and it just has this, pardon my pun, chain reaction of things, and it really has just caught like wildfire from there. So I think really it's the players at the core of it who just fall in love with this sport and tell their friends. Besides, obviously, the pandemic, like Chuck was saying, it was a way for people to get outside and safely recreate. And, we're still seeing that now. People have stayed on since the pandemic and are still disc golfing regularly. And then they just keep telling more and more of their friends, and it just keeps growing that way.
All right. I promise this is the last time I'm going to talk before I let Josh go. Terry, lacrosse is a little different in that, of course, it's a team sport. I'm curious to hear from you about sort of the pandemic impact on lacrosse. But in a broader sense, we've seen lacrosse grow so much over, from kind of like what feels like a regional sport to clearly massively successful national sport over the last 20 or 30 years. Have there been these kind of booms? Have we seen these booms in lacrosse, or has it been more slow and steady for that sport?
Yeah, well, I think, just to address the issue of the pandemic in terms of growth and participation, in addition to it being a team sport, one of the other distinctions relative to pickleball and disc golf is that it is very much a youth-oriented sport. So I think that the disruption from the school and recreation, teams, rec sport league standpoint, really did tamp down growth in 20 and 21 and now into 22. And I spent a lot of time looking at the 22 SFIA report, and boys participation declined for the second year in a row by 11%. And, that's probably sounds a little bit more alarming than it actually is. 22 total participation was still up relative to 2016 and 17. So, and maybe even 2018. And as a result, you kind of see that in terms of regression, but at the same time, how, damaging is it really? And one of the other elements of that is when you compare it to similar types of team sports, I think that the timing of the pandemic had something to do with the way in which there was a lag in distribution. So specifically volleyball and softball saw a 20% decline in participation from 20 to 21, and then they actually saw participation growth in 21 to 22. And so that gives me a little bit of hope around lacrosse's ability to rebound in 23, just kind of forecasting or projecting that perhaps the way in which those numbers shook out ended up splitting that decline, because there's something that seems a little too coincidental around that. 11 times 2 equals 22%. And that's equivalent to some of the gains or losses rather that we saw in some of the equivalent, fast growing sports, particularly on the girls' side. As far as the growth rate, say over the last 30 years, I would say that there's been, moments of steepness and moments of comparative plateau. And I think that, we saw incredibly steep growth throughout the 90s and then a little bit of a plateau in the early 2000s. And then it resumed pretty substantially steep growth throughout the 2000s, a little bit of plateau in the early part of the decade. And then in the second half of the decade, we saw, some substantial return of that, pretty substantial, 7, 8, 9%, 10% annual growth in terms of total participation. There are a lot of different causes that you can speculate around it. But when I look at lacrosse's growth trajectory from a future standpoint, one of the things that has really kind of driven the growth in over the last 30 years is its arrival into new markets, and more those markets are exhausted, meaning that there aren't very many parts of the country where there isn't some presence of lacrosse. And so now the powers that be, the stakeholders that drive growth, have to devise a new strategy where it becomes less about entering new markets like San Antonio, Texas, one of the places where I still think there's, really tremendous growth in terms of the traditional places where lacrosse arrives, the small private high schools and the large, second and third ring suburban public high schools. And it needs to figure out ways to, penetrate the parts of regions where it's well established, but doesn't have a strong foothold. And those tends to be socioeconomically different as opposed to geographically different. So how does the sport find ways to appeal and gain foothold in rural communities and in urban communities and in first ring suburban communities in ways that it hasn't previously? And that's the challenge that lies ahead.
I think one of the biggest challenges with emerging sports as well is kind of the way it engages with the public, especially vis-a-vis professionalization of these sports. Steve, I'm going to start with you because I think from my very limited research, I think disc golf might actually have the cleanest contextualization of what professional disc golf looks like. So if you could give that a description for maybe listeners who are coming from either the lacrosse or the pickleball world, what does professional disc golf look like? How important is collegiate disc golf? Who runs the leagues? Just some of those basic questions.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting because, within disc golf, it feels like professional disc golf is a growing thing and a big thing, and it is. But I mean, it's still, if you take the 30,000 foot view, it's still very young on the organized professional side. We're talking about the Disc Golf Pro Tour that really started up in 2016, almost folded in 2019, and now is getting into more of a growth and expansion kind of thing. But it's still I'm trying to think of the right word for it. It's still growing into being a properly organized, professional circuit. I mean, as far as venue development and things like that go, we're still in many cases in public parks that are having to be rented out for the day and are not necessarily stadium type of facilities where you can control ingress and egress and make a great spectator experience. So in some ways it's really still at the ground level developing. To your question about college, same thing. I mean, college is I think a huge area of improvement and growth for disc golf, and there is starting to be more and more structure for that. There's been a collegiate national championship every year, but in terms of how to get organized for college disc golf, how to participate, how to get a club at your school organized with the college disc golf organization, there's still some work and growth to be done. We're starting to see a lot more growth there in terms of the number of schools that are now participating and qualifying for national championships and things like that. So, the educational to professional pipeline is still not like a heavy flow kind of thing. It's really just starting to kind of trickle and grow into what it can hopefully be down the road.
Terry, when you look at lacrosse, how then does the professional leagues, because from a quick search on Google, it looks like there's a couple professional leagues in lacrosse, but I also know and have seen coverage like on ESPN for D1 collegiate lacrosse. How does that, same question, professionalism and the leagues interact with the overall sport as well as then the collegiate side as well? Where does the importance lie?
Professional lacrosse is hard to explain, and I'll try to be as succinct as I can. The sport suffers a little bit from the fact that there are essentially three disciplines: men's field lacrosse, women's field lacrosse, and box lacrosse. Box lacrosse has its traditional roots in Canada, and there have been professional / semi-professional summer box loops in Canada for more than 100 years. So there is a long established legacy of quote unquote professional lacrosse. That being said, relative to this last generation's growth, the relationship is pretty tenuous. There is a professional box lacrosse league that is now in 15 markets that is playing its 37th year, and it's been rebranded 3 or 4 times. It's called the National Lacrosse League. And then there is a pro men's field league that is 4 years old. They're entering their 5th season. That disrupted an incumbent, a predecessor that had been in place for 19 and then eventually 20 seasons before, essentially merging with the new professional league called the Premier Lacrosse League, and that was founded by Paul Rabel, who was a player in the prior league and is one of the most prominent, probably the most prominent player of lacrosse, nationally, globally, and certainly has increased his profile relative to his entrepreneurial stake. And then with respect to women's lacrosse, there were 2 different failed startup efforts over the course of the last 6 or 7 years that ultimately gave way to Athletes Unlimited creating a women's lacrosse platform within their organization that just completed its 2nd season. I think the relationship between pro lacrosse and collegiate lacrosse is loose but important. Certainly, it is the feeder system and the distinction. And I think that this is probably the key distinction for understanding the sport of lacrosse relative to every other North American sport, at least in terms of the way that the general public conceives of it. And certainly being a member of an emerging sport conversation, I'm sure that there are aspects of this that you guys can relate to and don't normally apply. But I often say that lacrosse is unique among North American sports in the way that it doesn't have a professional or Olympic aspiration that exceeds the child's aspiration to play college lacrosse. For so many kids that playing Division I lacrosse is the pinnacle aspiration, and the opportunity to play internationally and collegiately is something that happens after your college career is done. And, that's an important distinction. And I think that, the NCAA celebrated its 50th men's Division I championship in 2021. It was the, I believe, 35th women's championship this past year. And so there is a long held tradition for men's and women's college lacrosse, and the growth of participating programs, specifically at the Division II and Division III level in the last 10 years, has been directly correlated and, in my opinion, in some respects, if not in most respects, causal for that growth at the youth level. And so I can't overstate how important both NCAA program participation, NAIA participation, and then collegiate club participation is in terms of being a central engine to the sport's growth overall.
Chuck, I'd like to then direct the same question to you. I think in terms of pickleball, when I look at like traditional media sources, Wall Street Journal being a prime example of articles that are published, I see a lot about Major League Pickleball in the status quo, and especially the involvement of celebrities purchasing teams, investing and being a part of it. What is the professional makeup right now of professional pickleball? How do you see it moving forward? And does it have any relationship with a collegiate level?
Right. So, 4 years ago, there was no such thing as a professional pickleball player, essentially. I mean, there was some prize money out there, but nothing like what there is today. And it's really an intriguing sports business case study when you look at how quickly this whole industry has popped up within the sport. And it's lended a lot of legitimacy and credibility to the sport because you have this whole professional side of the sport. And to answer your question, there are two tours. The APP, which is the Association of Pickleball Professionals, the PPA, which is the Professional Pickleball Association, and then MLP, which you mentioned, Major League Pickleball. There have been a lot of A-list celebrities, a lot of top mainstream sports stars, Hall of Fame guys like LeBron James, Tom Brady, Drew Brees, Kevin Durant getting into the sport. A lot of deep pockets, have come into the sport. And I don't think just based on the way the sports industry infrastructure is set up these days and digital media and everything else, I don't think you would have seen it happen quite as quickly as it has, say 25 years ago. So it's really remarkable. How quickly it's popped up. And for example, we host our USA Pickleball National Championships, and we do that at the Indian Wells Tennis Garden, which hosts the BNP Paribas Open, the fifth largest tennis event in the world, right? We also have an event we work with the APP on their event in Flushing Meadows at the USTA Billie Jean King Center. So these are the kinds of places where pickleball is being played right now, which is nuts. And just how quickly it's happened. So the professional side is, a lot has been written and a lot has been talked about how this is, an ever-changing landscape. And it is. There's a lot of shifts that are happening. And it's pretty exciting to see the names that are getting involved in the sport. On the collegiate side, we look at that at USA Pickleball as a huge opportunity for the sport, again, as it continues to skew younger. So we're seeing a lot of club teams pop up on campuses across the country, especially on the East Coast right now. And you're starting to see the early formation of collegiate-specific tournaments taking place, which is also exciting to see.
So I don't want this to just be a Q&A between us and you. I think that you all probably have things that you're interested in hearing about from each other. So I'll at least seed that idea in your mind, and we'll have a chance for you to ask questions to each other in a little bit. But before we get to that, though, I'm really curious to hear from each of you what you see as kind of having been the primary driver of growth, because I think it might be different for each of the sports. Now, and I want to accept COVID here because I think that COVID had its own specific influences that we've already talked about. But, it seems to me, pickleball and disc golf were both doing well before COVID. And then there was sort of like this groundswell that it then popped up a little bit more, but things were already in decent growth shape. So what has been the primary driver for getting the sport to emerge? I mean, I think of all of these sports, disc golf still feels like easily the smallest in terms of kind of mind share of people in the world. with, pickleball getting constant press and lacrosse having been a big deal for what feels like a long time at this point. So, I kind of want to leave it open-ended. What's been the catalyst that's made the sport popular besides, the obvious things like it's fun and, I think we all can make the case for why our sports are fun. But what has been the thing that has really pushed the sport forward historically? So I don't know. Anybody can pick it up, but I'll throw it to Steve first.
Yeah, I mean, I think, for disc golf, there's been like various like waves of growth, right? And obviously, like you mentioned, excepting COVID, the last one I kind of think of is, that like 2012, 2013 type of, uptick there with, a confluence of a couple things, at least, that I'm sure you guys have talked about on the show. First and foremost being digital media. You had access to YouTube and people starting to go out and film rounds of disc golf and putting it out on the internet for people to watch for free, right? Like, you had this sport that was already super cheap and you can sit at home and watch it for free. Oh my gosh, this is great. Let's do more of it, right? And so you had from back to, LCGM8, and then you've got Central Coast Disc Golf and McFly So High and all these guys. Obviously, then you get Jomez emerging and kind of taking things to the next level. That all coincides with this super dominant period of time by Paul Macbeth, who, for you guys who don't know, disc golf is widely regarded as the best player of all time. We can have that conversation between him and Ken Klima later.
I don't think the best pickleballer's name is Paul. We got two Pauls.
But so I mean, those two things kind of converge to have this real level of accessibility and almost like a Tiger Woods style influx of this one person just being can't miss TV, right? And so that really, I think, drove some of the excitement from where people could just access it more and learn more about a professional level. And then that, that goes along with an influx of more courses. I mean, we've seen the number of courses just absolutely explode in the last decade. And so I think you put those things together, you put more places to play, and you put just more general consciousness of what disc golf is, and it's made it to where people can just get out there and experience it on, in their town or in the next couple towns over. And then when they're not out playing it, they can still consume it. And so I think those two things, the infrastructure and the media, have kind of just collided, to really make for this natural upswing.
Chuck, does anything ring a bell in there for pickleball?
It does. It's funny. I think if there's a master's student in sports administration looking to do a thesis on emerging sports, they're going to want to watch this podcast, because I think you're going to see a lot of similarities. What Steve talked about, I think a lot of those things ring true for pickleball as well. Just in addition to the fact that it's inherently fun. And by the way, I've worked in sports for a while now, and I've never heard so many people talk about their passion for the sport by using the terms addicted and obsessed more than any. And you guys all know, like, people are just, crazy about their respective sport, but it's with pickleball, it's almost at a different level.
You got to talk to some disc golfers.
I'm sure. And pandemic effect aside. Oh, by the way, so the best pickleball players are a gentleman named Ben Johns and a woman named Annalie Waters, who's only 15 years old, by the way. So when you look at what has kind of been the recipe for pickleball, I think you need to look at the low barrier to entry. Like, pickleball is a sport that is easy to play. It's easy to learn. You don't need to get coached up. You don't need to train for a long period of time. You can put a paddle in just about anybody's hand, and in a half an hour or less, they're going to be able to play a game and start enjoying the sport and just having fun, and be able to do it at a serviceable level. So I think that plays a huge role in it. And I also think when you look at supply being able to meet demand. I think that for us, the planets really aligned, not to invoke the pandemic again, but, from a timing standpoint, to your point, Charlie, you mentioned that, the sport has a longer history than most people realize. So USA Pickleball was founded in 2005. And I had no idea until I joined the organization. There's a national network of 1,900 USA Pickleball ambassadors. These are volunteers. These are folks at the local level who go to city council meetings. They go to HOA meetings. They approach school districts. And they've been doing this for years, for decades, and kind of sowing the seeds for, this opportunity for the sport to explode. It just didn't happen overnight. These courts have been being put into place now for a very long time. And that was, access to playing surfaces was really huge for the sport. It couldn't have happened, say 10, 15 years ago. If the pandemic had happened then, we would not as a sport have been able to take advantage of the opportunity that was presented. So we hit a major milestone this year. Last year, there were 9,000 and change facilities, pickleball facilities in the country. This year, we hit the milestone of 10,000. And I think we're going to end the year at around 10,600. Every day in this country, here's a fun fact. So there are 3 new pickleball facilities that open up, venues. Now, that's everything from a DIY court in somebody's backyard, which is happening, to, Parks and Rec, facilities, to, franchises with restaurants and bars and all kinds of things built into them. There are 3 of those facilities opening every day in this country, with an average of 4 courts per facility, which is crazy. So it's not, we get the question sometimes, is pickleball a fad? Is this a trend that's maybe going to go away? And maybe we can later on in the conversation talk about the sustainability of exponential rates of growth within a sport. But these facilities are just, there's no slowing down for pickleball. Like, there are just more and more facilities coming online, which is really key for the continued growth of the sport.
Yeah, I would just swim upstream a little bit relative to some of the points that Chuck made, because I don't think lacrosse is easy to play or learn. I think the rules are very hard. I think that catching and throwing a lacrosse ball while you're moving is second only to hitting a baseball pitch in terms of the difficult things that kids do when they play sports. So I think the reason that kids, and that's one of the elements of the sport that is a little bit challenging, and is another challenge that the sport is facing in terms of growth, is creating vehicles for entry when you are no longer within your athletic peak, or 10 years old and afraid of nothing. But I think if you go to any lacrosse team and ask the high school players, why did you gravitate toward this game, you get a handful of different answers. And I think that kind of underscores its appeal. I think for a lot of kids, it was an alternative to baseball, which meant either that they got cut or they didn't like standing around. I think for a lot of kids, their parents didn't know anything about the game, and that in and of itself was appealing because it meant that they couldn't tell them what they did wrong in the car home from the games. And there's people in the sport don't like it when I say this, but there's an arts and crafts element to it from the standpoint of actually stringing the stick that appeals to a small subset of every player on every team, a small subset of players on every team. So I think that diversity of what gravitates people toward the game then gives way to a community that I think is very relatable to everybody on this call, with respect to, once something that is niche becomes a part of your identity, part of your personhood, and you start to wear a lacrosse stick on your hat or your shirt, and it becomes an opportunity to have a conversation with somebody that knows what it is when you see them at the mall or the airport or wherever, then all of a sudden it just, the way in which passion gets inflamed becomes something that you do for the rest of your life, or something that at least you're engaged with for the rest of your life. I do think that one of the downsides of the heavy emphasis on college lacrosse is that, roughly 12 to 13% of high school lacrosse players play in college, which is one of the highest percentages of any team sport. And it's a good thing in the sense that it means that if you play high school lacrosse, you have a decent opportunity, better than 1 in 10 chance to play in college. But the value proposition of playing is oftentimes not what high school athletes are ready to sign up for. The time commitment and how onerous it is and how much of your experience of playing in college that you have to sacrifice in order for the return of game day, it just doesn't add up and it leads to burnout. And so we see a lot of post-collegiate players walk away from the game totally until essentially their kids start playing, and that's when they re-engage. And so I think one of the things that's really interesting about what's going on right now in terms of there is nothing that could impact the future of lacrosse, in my opinion, in 2023 more than whether or not the LA 28 host committee makes a decision to include it as a host city sport. And it's gone through the process. It's got to this point. The chances are still alive. And depending on who you talk to, they're roughly 50-50. And, if it were to happen, not only would it bring with it all the benefits of being a part of the Olympics, but it would bring this associated benefit of cost and benefit. There's a new discipline that will be played in the Olympics if lacrosse gets into the Olympics. It's called sixes, and it's akin to rugby sevens in the way that it's a boiled down version of the sport. Smaller field, shorter duration of games, fewer players on a team, fewer players on the field at one time. One of the things that's most beneficial about it is that everybody plays with a short stick, a stick that's 40 inches long, whereas in field lacrosse, defenders play with a 6-foot long stick. And what it ultimately kind of yields is I do think that there's going to be the increased popularity of essentially co-ed 3-on-3 beach style lacrosse that will be way more accessible to folks who have never played and are 23 years old or 30 years old or 40 years old. Played with a softball, so it doesn't hurt if you get hit with the ball, and it's not nearly as technically engrossing as an actual field lacrosse game is. So, it's this push-pull sense of how much are you willing to confuse your audience when your audience already doesn't understand the very nuanced rule set that you're playing with by adding more disciplines to the game, while ultimately realizing that there's benefit in creating something that is more accessible. So I packed a lot in there when it comes to what does the youngest athlete gravitate toward and why, all the way up to how do you ensure that if you have mom and dad who never played, there's still an opportunity for them to at least understand how hard it is to throw and catch so that they don't criticize Timmy and Jenny in the car on the way home for not dropping that or not catching that pass. So there's just a lot wrapped up into the issue of like, why did it grow? How did it grow? And how does it continue to kind of harness that growth?
I find it super fascinating, and I'm just going to kind of open the floor here because you have lacrosse, which is like primarily been driven through like school-based competition, elementary, middle, high school, into college. And then you have, I don't want to speak for pickleball because I don't know this, but my sense of it is that it's basically relatively non-existent outside of like PE class for the most part. I'm sure that's changing now, but it's not been a big school discipline. And I mean, disc golf is so embarrassingly underdeveloped in schools that you might as well say it doesn't exist in schools. And it's just now starting to scratch the surface of becoming a college sport. But you have these very different things because disc golf and pickleball are very accessible for adults to pick up and play. And like in theory, it's okay for kids too, but disc golf, it's kind of harder for kids to get going. Like, you kind of have to be able to throw hard. It maybe just isn't as accessible. We have a lot of work to do there in inside of disc golf, but the accessibility for adults versus the accessibility for kids in schools, like total inverses, it feels like. So I'm just curious for your reactions to that, and maybe the challenges of lacrosse, say, feel like the inverse challenges to disc golf, and perhaps to pickleball. So you're just curious for your thoughts.
I generally have some thoughts on kind of the disc golf infrastructure at the youth and educational level, and I do want to give some credit to Uplay, who we work with quite a bit. Zoe and Dustin, they've been doing a lot of work to get disc golf into schools via clinics and teaching PE teachers. But that said, Charlie, you're right. Like, disc golf is woefully underserved at the youth level. And I think some of that is, like you mentioned, yes, it is harder for some kids, but maybe that's an infrastructure problem too. I mean, like, you look at the courses that are being put up, and the people who get real passionate about disc golf want to put in big, badass 18-hole courses that the next Pro Tour event can come to in their town, right? When really what's going to spark the next like generation of players is a variety of courses, right? We need 9-hole courses. We need little 6-hole courses in small parks that are, even if they're like 150, 200 feet, right? You need holes that are easier for kids to play, that maybe are on school campuses, which has actually been a nice little growth area that we've seen. I was looking at some numbers just yesterday, and I think we're like school and university courses are up like 30% or something like that over the last year. So that's super encouraging. But I think that the infrastructure part of it is big, in terms of, we don't just have to have 18-hole courses go into a big park. Like, let's use some other pieces of land that are maybe closer to more densely populated areas, so more people can get to them, shorter, more accessible for new players. And then the other part of that is maybe some other like outreach programs. Terry, I don't know how familiar you are with it, but I remember a couple years back, my daughter got a flyer at her school for the Try Lacrosse program through USA Lacrosse. And it was like $30, and you go out to the park and someone teaches you how to play lacrosse, and you come home with a lacrosse stick. Now, we didn't go to that. I considered it, but she wasn't super interested in lacrosse. But just knowing that there is that kind of program from the governing body of lacrosse, USA Lacrosse, like, I would love to see disc golf's governing body, the PDGA, invest in some kind of program like that at a level where it's an introductory level thing. Hey, here's this flyer that we're going to give out at school. You're going to get a disc. You're going to come out to this short 9-hole course near the school, and we're going to teach you how to play disc golf. And it's things like that. It's the strategic outreach that I think we're missing. It's some of the more accessible infrastructure that we're missing, and is now starting to kind of filter out. And I hope to see that it does kind of increase in that way to get, more young people playing, because it's not super inaccessible. You've seen, junior worlds and things like that start to get bigger, which is great. Now we just need to kind of like spread that out from, moms and dads who like disc golf, bringing their kids along with them to the course, to getting it in schools or other recreational city level activities to make it, more of a natural thing.
I will say this, I live in New York City. From my apartment, it's 45 minutes minimum to drive to a disc golf course. And I have 2 pickleball, meetup groups that play within 10 minutes of me, and I could walk or bike there. I don't know about lacrosse, unfortunately, but I'm sure it would be a little bit more of an effort to find a lacrosse game. I'm sure they play in Central Park or something. But, the ease of setting up and it's all temporary, just like somebody puts up a net and draws chalk lines. And so that makes it so easy to play, and you can play on a tennis court or whatever. But Chuck, obviously you can kind of put a pickleball court anywhere. So that problem seems like it's getting solved fast, considering that you're saying 3 new facilities and 4 courts a day are going in. It's remarkable. But what's the situation with the youth outreach, and where is pickleball there?
Yeah, no, excuse me. That's a huge priority for us at USA Pickleball. And you're right. You can play pickleball pretty much anywhere. You can play in a cul-de-sac. You can play in your driveway. You don't need much. So what we're doing is working with Franklin, the sporting goods manufacturer, and they're our youth program development partner. Right. So we're putting together these right now, these kits. It's like pickleball in a box, that we can send out to physical education teachers at school. And it's got, kind of more inexpensive less expensive. There you go. Wooden paddles that are also a little bit more durable because kids use them as hammers, but balls, and you don't need a real net. It's like a roll of tape. Then there are these rubber dots that you can put down as targets on the floor, and it all comes in a big giant duffel bag. And we can send these out to the schools, and they can participate, through this program and teach kids how to play pickleball, at an early age. So we look at that as a really big opportunity. We're also giving grants. So we have what are called youth program provider grants. We supported 43 different programs. We approved 43 different programs this year, and we're providing them with some direct. We don't have our foundation set up. That's a goal for next year. But in the meantime, we're providing some grant support to local programs to get kids involved, because we look at that as a huge opportunity for the continued. It's a long-term strategy. It's really not a huge moneymaker, but it's, when we work with Franklin, what we're doing is mirroring some of the same programs that they've done for decades to introduce kids to baseball and hockey. And we're trying to mirror some of those same best practices.
I know Franklin makes disc golf discs. Please feel free to put in a good word.
Sounds good. And I've got, here in Colorado Springs, Olympic City, USA. So, Terry, I've talked with Jim Shear and Eric Parthen about getting lacrosse into LA 28, and my fingers are crossed. I hope it happens. And Steve, I've got 2 disc golf courses, I would say, within 15 minutes of me. So just so you guys know, it's alive and well here in Colorado. Oh yeah,
Colorado's killer for disc golf. People love it there. It's one of our bright spots.
I have, Charlie, you mentioned that we'd have the opportunity to ask questions, and I've got 2 questions that apply to both of you guys, or the entire group. So one of the things that I'm interested in is each of you have essentially entry sports that you then can convert from, right? So, Charlie, when we spoke last, it was about ultimate frisbee. Clearly that could be a lead gen, so to speak, for disc golf. And then actual golf, right, is another option or opportunity. And then Chuck, certainly pickleball is kind of both a cousin of, and also let me just make this caveat. I hope I'm not saying anything that's offending anybody, but pickleball is a cousin of tennis and a cousin of ping pong. How do those conversions happen within your sports from somebody who's familiar with one discipline and then saying, give this a try? Is that generally speaking how folks pick it up for the first time?
I think in pickleball, you've got a lot of former tennis players, certainly, especially at the adult level. So I think tennis has been a great, I wouldn't call it feeder system. We look at all the racket sports as being symbiotic, and you can throw badminton in there too. Pickleball is kind of a mashup of all 3 of those sports. But absolutely. We see a lot of converts coming over from those other racket sports and enjoying pickleball. And it doesn't necessarily mean that they're leaving those other sports. But at the same time, we've got a lot of people who are just new and they never played tennis. And this is really the first time that they're holding a paddle in their hands and they're just, learning from scratch and enjoying the sport. But you're right. We do have those other sister sports that have really helped kind of build that base for pickleball.
Charlie, I know
tennis
you're not...
and ping pong first, and now I also play pickleball. I play all 3.
I love it.
Sorry,
Charlie, how are your knees these days? How are your knees?
My knees are fine. Your knees
are fine. You haven't played ultimate in a while though, right?
Oh, excuse me. I'm a multi-time summer and fall league champion, Steve.
All right, I'm sorry. I take that back.
No, I still play, but I mean certainly a lot less than I used to. And disc golf has filled some of my disc time.
And I think that's one of the things we see in disc golf is, natural progression of ultimate is very high tempo,
really
very
physical,
high energy, very physical. And you get to a certain age and disc golf maybe becomes a little more appealing. I will say a lot of ultimate players really came over during the pandemic because ultimate got totally shut down. And so it wasn't necessarily always age, but there are definitely people who age into it and have those general disc skills. They don't translate 100%. Obviously, I'm sure Charlie could wax philosophical about that too. But they still generally, can come over that way. Golf, I think, I don't know how many people feed in from golf as much. It's a good comparator when we're talking about it. A new sport. You can say, hey, I'm going to go play disc golf. Someone says, huh, what? It's just like golf, but you're throwing like a Frisbee into a basket, same rules and everything. Disc golf, I think, is more economically accessible than golf. So I think that's one of the appealing things that might bring people over from golf. And then honestly, skill set wise, a lot of successful disc golfers have been baseball players in the past. A lot of the similar mechanics in a throw can be similar to batting in baseball, and then also just your general, pitching, things like that for forehands and stuff. So I would throw baseball in there as another sport that is kind of fed into disc golf generally. But I think a lot of times it's not really like, I ran out of juice in this sport and I'm going to go check out this other one. It's just kind of like their friends took them out and they had this kind of innate athletic ability already. And it's made it more accessible and easier for them to catch on with disc golf because they had some of those just built in skills already. Is there a sport like that for lacrosse? That's because to me, I don't know a lot about lacrosse, but it's a fairly unique skill set and activity, right?
Yeah, I don't think that there's a crossover skill set that kind of, predisposes you. I think it's more so the type of athlete that you are and where you're from. It changes based on how popular a particular sport is. And I'm especially referring to hockey. So in parts of the country where hockey is really popular, or in Canada, then you see more hockey lacrosse players. Whereas in parts of the country where hockey is less popular, you see more football lacrosse players. And then on the girls' side, certainly there's probably a pretty strong correlation between. Actually, you know what? I'm going to take that back. I was going to say there's a strong correlation between field hockey and lacrosse, but I actually don't think that's really true. I think that if you look at the percentage of girls lacrosse players, probably about half, and of those who play a fall sport, probably about half play soccer and half play field hockey. It's not as like 1-to-1 as you might otherwise expect.
The one thing I think that's also interesting when you compare lacrosse as opposed to either pickleball or disc golf is that pickleball and disc golf can be accessed, especially if there's an indoor facility in the case of pickleball, year round, and are often played for age groups of college and younger simultaneously with their organized sporting competitions, right? So you'll have a baseball player who is a baseball athlete, plays on a team, and then during their off season in the fall and winter will disc golf as a key example. I don't think that's the case as much in lacrosse based on the description of college. It is the organized team sport. So you don't have as many crossover athletes because it's difficult to do lacrosse as well as another sport.
Sport specialization has come at the expense of every other sport, right? And the fewer and fewer high school athletes playing 2 and 3 sports in a year has come at the expense of every sport. So, there's no doubt that, ultimately, if activity level is what you're aspiring to, then certainly we're also competing with kids doing stuff that isn't that active. So, there's a lot at play and there's a lot of social science that's wrapped up into it as well. And that's where, I kind of come back to the original point that this is, for no sport is this a problem that's going to be, or are these problems, to the extent that they are problems, are they going to be solved with one solution? It's going to have to be, a multi-angled attack, so to speak. But I do have one other question, and I know that we're getting up against it. So let me just kind of get the bat off my shoulder. Chuck, you mentioned 3 different professional tours. And one of the things that I'm familiar with is that, emerging sports that go through this white hot phase attract a lot of, for lack of a better way of putting it, competition, and that can lead to fragmentation. And I'm sure that that's true in disc golf as well. How do you guys see your sport handling it?
Yeah, so great question. It's an open market, right? And you're going to have various folks who come into the space and they're going to be competing for the same territory. So there is some of that natural, capitalistic competition, that's going on within the sport. And it happens in a lot of different verticals within the sport. It's not just, the professional events side or the pro athlete side and, which players are playing for which tour or in which league. But there's all these other, business verticals that you can look at, whether it's, e-commerce or online event registration or whatever the case may be. And, that's something that just sorts itself out, through the natural process. We're the national governing body of the sport, right? So we're agnostic, and we want to have mutually beneficial relationships with everybody in the sport, as long as they're looking out for the best interests of the sport itself and everybody who's playing it and participating it at some level. We're kind of the caretaker for the sport, right? So that's those are the kinds of things that we're focusing on. But it's just within the past year, there have been a lot of shifts within the landscape, and it's ever changing. And gosh, it seems like every week there's some kind of major headline about somebody jumping into the sport, or this changing or that changing. So it's a whirlwind.
Yeah, it's real interesting in that regard for disc golf. A lot of the fragmentation has come more in the equipment space, with more manufacturers of discs jumping into the game. And, back in the 80s, it was Innova, and then, Discraft for a while. And then you get into the 2000s and you start having several other companies, and God, there's a new company every day popping up on the PDGA approved disc list now. It's crazy. So the amount of equipment manufacturers, I think, is where we've seen a lot of the split in the sport. As far as the professional tours, there's actually been a contraction. With the Disc Golf Pro Tour essentially taking over the PDGA's national tour. In Europe, there are a couple different tours, so there is a little more competition there between the European Pro Tour, Euro Tour, and things like that. But that's actually kind of one of the things I think is real interesting, and I think why we see a lot of real aggressive growth in terms of number of tournaments and trying to get more prize money and anything on the Disc Golf Pro Tour, because ultimately they are kind of vulnerable to a potential outside entity that has a lot of money that could come in and prop up their own tour. And like, if there's a LeBron James that wants to come and throw a bunch of money at disc golf and make huge payouts, the players will go there because they want to make a living off of it. So, do I anticipate that happening? I don't know. I almost kind of feel like it would have by now if it were really going to, but, I think that disc golf is still a little bit ripe for competition at the professional level, potentially. And, in the manufacturing space and equipment space, I think it's been a good thing. Honestly, we've seen, more innovation in design and more options for players to be able to go out and enjoy. So ultimately I kind of welcome some of that, because that means, if someone with more money is coming into disc golf, that means we're doing something right, and we're getting eyeballs on the right things, hopefully.
Chuck, Steve, you guys have questions for the group?
Yeah. So, Steve, I would ask you, when you guys look at what the future holds for the sport, disc golf has been around for a long time, and it's fairly established. But what, how do you envision that future growth, or what that looks like? What needs to happen, I guess, for the continued growth of the sport?
I think we need USA Pickleball's publicist, because you guys are everywhere. And if you could hook us up with the SFIA, that'd be great. Because honestly, I would love to see some of these numbers. It's one of the things that disc golf does kind of lack, is that and it's something we're trying to solve a little bit at UDisc. We have a lot of information, but we don't, as far as like that big number of how many people play disc golf, right? Disc golf, it wasn't too long ago, before the last couple years of pickleball kind of taking the mantle, that a lot of people pointed to disc golf as that fastest growing sport in the United States. There wasn't like a real number to back it up, but it was just an anecdotal thing. And everyone would say, oh yeah, disc golf, it's one of the fastest growing sports. We really need that kind of information to hopefully keep that going. But the other part of it is, I think what will help continue disc golf growth is similar to probably what pickleball is trying to do, is just more infrastructure. Like, you're talking about, you guys had 3 facilities a day with 4 courts. That's amazing. Disc golf last year, I think, had 5.28 courses per day put in the ground, which is phenomenal. we need to keep up a pace like that just has more places for people to play. There's a lot of disc golf in the United States. International growth, I think, is going to be another key for the sport to be sustainable, because really, there's the US, there's Canada, there's Northern Europe, and then there's a whole lot of the world left where disc golf really has an opportunity to grow and expand. And I would imagine that's similar for both pickleball and lacrosse. I'd be curious to know a little bit more about kind of the international, if we have a couple minutes, the international outlook for both pickleball and lacrosse, because especially, Terry, you mentioned the Olympics and things like that. I think really, like, we're all very US centric on this podcast, for obviously that's where we live, but looking beyond the US, I think, is really where disc golf can make some gains.
Yeah, I think that international growth for lacrosse right now is very Olympics oriented in terms of the outcome. And I think that there's a lot of different kind of methods for that. So first is creating the national governing bodies all over the world. If memory serves correctly, the 79th national governing body was just recognized by the international governing body. And so that's probably up from 50 roughly when Jim Scher, who Chuck mentioned, former, I believe, CEO of the USOC and has been the CEO of World Lacrosse since 2017, joined. So within 5 years, growth has just exploded dramatically. Now that then includes regional associations that can create tournaments that then create greater incentive for local participation. And then those national governing bodies actually accessing their sport ministries in order to get funds and in order to get strategies to get into attracting new players. And then, as I mentioned, the creation of this new discipline that lowers the barrier of entry and creates greater accessibility, whether it be dual gender, whether it be lower contact, ultimately the fact that it requires fewer people to play competitive games is a huge differentiating factor. So the point is that the gap between participation in the United States and everywhere else in the world is really wide. But then between the United States and Canada Canada and everywhere else in the world is equally wide. And then Great Britain, Japan, and Australia. And then from there on, it's pretty equitable throughout most of Western Europe, where you have, a couple hundred, maybe a couple thousand people that have played, much less are actively playing. And then in order to both recruit new players as well as retain your existing players, you need to develop strategies and utilize resources or harness resources in order to be able to do it. So it's a long way of saying that I think at the moment, international growth is a mechanism toward Olympic inclusion. And then on the backside of that, Olympic inclusion becomes the mechanism toward international growth.
Yeah, so a question that we get a lot is pickleball going to be on the Olympic program for LA 28? That is not going to happen. We try not to dismiss that question, because is that a long-term goal for the sport? Absolutely. We would love to see that happen eventually. But the sport is just on an international scale, not nearly developed enough to be considered for that yet. So USA Pickleball is trying to take a leadership position within that space and help with the formation of a universally recognized international federation, and to help other countries establish their own respective national federations. So there's probably 9 to 12 of those countries that have what you might refer to as a national federation. In some cases, they're very loosely formed associations. It's pretty much the U.S. and Canada, and Australia is number 3. But between those 3 countries, that represents about 99% of the folks playing pickleball. Now, is it spreading across Europe, and are people starting to find out about it? Yes. Charlie, you might have mentioned padel, or someone might have mentioned that. That's a very European centric sport that's a little bit similar to pickleball. So, it was a demonstration sport at the Maccabi Games this year in Israel. So we had an opportunity to go there and to just help spread the word and expose people to the sport. Myself and our COO, Justin Maloof, we went down to the World Games, which were hosted in Birmingham, Alabama this year. We were not on the program at all, but we went down there to talk with the organizers for the World Games, the International World Games Organizing Committee, and talk to them about what would it take, what would that look like for pickleball to eventually be included as a sport and there are a lot of speaking of emerging sports, there are a lot of emerging sports at the World Games, so it's a huge priority for us, but we are still very much in our infancy as a sport when it comes to the international side.
I should add that men's lacrosse participated in the World Games for the first time in July. Women's lacrosse was a part of it in Wroclaw in 2017. And I got an opportunity to go this past summer. And it was, I'm not exaggerating, the coolest experience I've ever had in the sport. Primarily because you're just surrounded by so many like-minded people, folks who have dedicated their lives and entwined their identity with this emerging sport. To Chuck's point, it was incredible. And I think that it really opened my eyes to the benefit, right, of that cost benefit scenario of how much effort is it going to require to go through all the different recognition and certification processes in order to gain international standing that gets you included in these competitions, offset by how valuable is it to be included in these competitions. When you stand next to the Dutch korfball team and they talk to you about why are they players allowed to hit each other with their stick, and you realize that you have to figure out a way to answer that question for the first time, it kind of does vindicate a lot of that effort that goes into it. It was an incredible experience.
We should have had a beer, Terry. I didn't know you were there. I was there.
I had too many beers.
I was there broadcasting Ultimate.
Oh, right on.
And it's true. It's quite an experience to be there. Like, I was eating in the dining, because I don't know, my credential let me eat in the dining hall with all the athletes.
Yeah.
Wild to see all of these, people from all over the world playing in their various sports and like all the different body types of all the different sports. It's crazy. God. But I drove past the stadium for lacrosse. I think it was the final. Was it US versus Canada men's final?
It was at night, and that was the only night game. So, yeah. How
many people were there?
I mean, the stands seated 4,500, and it was pretty full. So, I mean, more than 4,000. Yeah,
it was jammed. I guess I don't know exactly what sport I was driving past, but there were a lot of people there. But it's pretty cool. And disc golf is trying to get into the World Games in 2025. Those efforts are underway, like literally right now. I think that the application is like this week. And disc golf is just internationally developed enough, I think, to be able to participate in an international competition like that. And sounds like pickleball maybe still needs a couple years of development internationally before it's time for that.
That's why Chuck's there.
That's right.
No pressure. Thanks, Terry.
You got it.
The tug of war venue was right next to the lacrosse stadium, so maybe that was the correct crowd that you were saying. I went over there and watched. All kidding aside, I went over there and watched some of that competition. It was an education. It was pretty cool.
They've got tug of war in the World Games.
I got sucked into it.
Yes.
Oh yeah,
man. Oh yeah. We gotta get Charlie. We gotta get disc golf over there, man.
The efforts are underway. All right. Well, I feel like we could go on and on. Steve, I'm going to give you a chance to ask a question, and then we'll probably have to wrap it up at that point.
Oh, I mean, the international question was mine, so I'll politely defer. I think this has been really cool to it's really interesting to hear the commonalities, right? And I kind of knew that coming in that we were all going to find things in common between these very different sports, but it's also kind of heartwarming to know we're all like ultimately working for these sports that we love. And yeah, it's going to take some work, and we're not going to be the NFL overnight or ever probably, but man, it's going to be fun trying. So, I think I'm okay on questions, but thank you for the opportunity.
Sure. I saw today, looks like YouTube is going to get the NFL Sunday ticket deal, $2.5 billion for next year.
We'll get there, right?
What are you talking about? You're already on YouTube. That's the way this whole conversation started.
That's true. Disc Golf Network is just like salivating right now about $2.5 billion, right?
it's interesting, the media deals and the size of the industry and just how much money is kind of possible with the equipment side, and then maybe eventually the broadcasting side. Obviously, all of these professional organizations are hoping to be able to command deals of even a fraction of what the NFL does. I guess I'll just leave this as maybe a quick last question to answer. How has the industry developed, and kind of what's next for having that kind of the money side of the sport help drive growth?
So for lacrosse, I think that the late 2000s into this past decade saw a tremendous number of entrants, either startups or the global multi-sport brands, creating their lacrosse vertical. And I think we've seen retraction over the last 5 years. And I think that retraction has manifested in a number of ways. And I think ultimately there's a little bit of a level reset that will probably correspond with this next phase of growth that we enter. And I think ultimately for the sport to really unlock that next stage of growth, it has to do as good of a job of attracting non-endemic sponsorship, be it your financial services, your beverage, your auto, your cell technology, whatever the case may be, category affinity partners that grow with you, akin to what soccer was able to do in the United States in the late 90s and early 2000s. I mean, for me, at least in my lifetime, that's the gold standard. And every sport should be aspiring to what soccer, US soccer and MLS were able to do with brands like Volkswagen and others, over that late 90s, early 2000s stretch.
Yeah, I think disc golf is in a similar boat where hopefully gaining in some of those non-endemic partners will be a big driver. A lot of the money in disc golf for payouts and tournaments and everything like that for bigger events comes from within disc golf. And so we're kind of, cannibalizing is too strong of a word, but we're all eating from the same pie for a while, and we need some other varieties of pie to get thrown in the mix. But in order to do that, I mean, it all kind of compounds, right? In order to do that, we need more players. In order to have more players, we need more places for people to play. We need more programs in schools. It kind of comes back to all these things we've been talking about. Like, ultimately, disc golf needs to be more attractive to sponsors. And right now, it's not 100% getting there because the demographics are very narrow. And, ultimately, if we get some more people playing and some more spread of the sport, I think we will see some other sponsors try and come in and see an opportunity there.
I don't want to push back on that last point all the way, but a little bit of the way, Steve, just insofar as the difference between scale versus affinity, particularly when it comes to an enriched vertical like this, and also the way in which I think that so much that's changing in the sponsorship market, particularly from a digital standpoint, is kind of coming back both to niche publishers and to potential sponsorable assets like what you're talking about. So, I mean, certainly I'm going to be looking at this from a very optimistic point of view, because both my company and my sport have the opportunity to benefit from it. But my point of view is that if you continue to chase scale, you're never going to meet the, established brands. So I think that what it comes down to, certainly you're always going to be competing against your old self, right? So you want to see improvement in that respect, as opposed to comparing yourself to UFC or Formula One or whatever the case may be.
Yeah.
But ultimately, whether it's all the changes from a privacy setting standpoint, increasing doubt around veracity of large social media platforms or other types of digital platforms, I do feel tailwinds toward brands looking at safer platforms that can provide legitimate data and a willingness to sacrifice on scale in order to gain on affinity. And I think that specifically with the Premier Lacrosse League, you've already started to see that bear fruit with large international brands saying this is a place that we want to activate.
Yeah, and I would reiterate everything that you guys just said. The non-endemic sponsorship side is exactly where we're focusing. And it's not just for revenue streams, although that's a key part of it. But if you can align with a Fortune 100 brand, then they're also going to hopefully incorporate you into their major mass media buys, right? Which is going to, you're going to get exposure that you otherwise wouldn't be able to get, which leads to another area that I think is key is television broadcast rights, and then spectatorship. I mentioned some of the venues that are hosting pickleball events these days. So, and again, I had no awareness of this until I really got into the sport of how much of a spectator sport pickleball is at the professional level, which is pretty cool. So for us as the national governing body, we also look at membership. We're a membership-driven organization. How do we drive membership within the organization? That's going to increase engagement among players. It's going to make them more likely to play in local tournaments, to travel to other, maybe bigger tournaments around the country, and to play the sport more often and to play the sport for a longer period of time. So how do we engage with them on a deeper level to help support that overall growth and sustainability of the sport moving forward? It's a virtuous cycle for us all. We operate on a revenue neutral basis as a nonprofit. So all the money that comes in, we're pushing that back out to the grassroots level in the form of programming or events or education or certification or whatever that looks like to help the sport become even more healthy.
It's fascinating. I think the macro trends of where money is flowing and what people are interested in. I mean, we're seeing more, sort of people are able to pick and choose a little bit more what they pay attention to in the internet era, and it's still kind of happening. And I think the same thing goes for sports. I mean, we didn't even really talk about this, but broad sports participation has been down for youth, like overall, like when you look at team sports. And I think we're all sitting here thinking about, okay, well, if kids are playing less football, what are they going to play? Maybe they're going to play our thing. And so that sort of overall trend is also something that's very interesting. We could go on and on, but thank you all for being here. We're well over time already. So we'll have to do a part 2 at some point. So Chuck, Terry, Steve, thank you so much.
Thank you guys. Happy New Year.
Thank you guys. Appreciate it.
Happy holidays. And I guess I'll just say that if you want to get in touch with anybody from the show for any particular reason, just email upshot@ultiworld.com and we can send out contact information to our panelists. So, all right, that's going to do it. For Chuck Menke, Terry Foy, Steve Hill, Josh Mansfield, I'm Charlie Eisenhood saying thank you so much for tuning in to this Emerging Sports podcast. Let us know your thoughts by email, and happy holidays, everybody.